On Christmas Day, 1991, a tired man walked into a television studio, put a folder on the desk, and resigned as president of a country that covered 1/6 of the Earth's land. That night, the red flag came down over the Kremlin. The Soviet Union, 22 million square kilometers, 15 republics, nearly 300 million people, was gone. Not conquered. Not defeated in war. It simply dissolved. 35 years later, the questions won't stop. How did the world's second superpower vanish without a single shot? And the stranger question, Russia still has the nuclear missiles. It still has the largest territory on Earth. It still sits at the same table as America. So what, exactly, did Russia lose? The answer is the story of how the country that defeated Hitler became the country we see today. Start in 1941. In June, Germany invades the Soviet Union with more than 3 million men. In the first weeks, the Red Army loses thousands of tanks and millions of prisoners. By December, German artillery is within sight of the Kremlin. Moscow is one push away. But the war doesn't end, it becomes the bloodiest conflict in human history. Stalingrad, a city ground to rubble, fought over building by building, until an entire German army, 300,000 men, is trapped and destroyed. By 1945, the red flag flies over the Reichstag in Berlin. The Soviet Union lost 27 million people, 1 in 7 of its citizens. It also did something no other country had managed, it broke the back of Nazi Germany. This is the first thing to understand about Soviet power. In 1917, Russia was the weakest link of the capitalist world, poor, agrarian, humiliated in war. In 2 decades of brutal 5-year plans, it built steel mills, tractor factories, and the largest tank force on Earth. The war turned that raw industrial muscle into the world's second superpower, and gave it a legitimacy no amount of propaganda could match. This was the state that saved Europe. But here is what most people get wrong. The Soviet Union was not powerful because of its tanks or its bombs. Those were symptoms. America, the richest country on Earth, feared the USSR for one reason, its idea. Think about the name. Union. Not Russia. Not any ethnicity or language. A country named after a social system, the only one in human history. Its founding claim, workers, not kings, not capitalists, would run the state. And for decades it looked true. Stalin, a cobbler's son. Brezhnev, a metallurgist's son. Gorbachev, a peasant's son. The men at the top of the Kremlin came from the bottom of society. Whatever you think of what they did, that had never happened before in any great power. That is why the West feared Moscow, not militarily, existentially. The USSR was living proof that another world was possible, and half the planet found that thrilling. Workers in Paris, Detroit, and Bombay saw a country where the boss class had been abolished. The American Civil Rights Revolution, the European welfare state, the end of colonial empires, historians now agree that much of that progress was the West's answer to the Soviet challenge. As Che Guevara predicted, after we go, they will build schools and hospitals, not because they became good, but because we were here. And the idea produced things that were real. Sputnik, 1957. Gagarin, 1961, the first human in space, cheered in New York as much as in Moscow. Free housing. An 8-hour workday. The most demanding school system on Earth, and a ballet audience of factory workers. A country where a peasant's grandson could become a cosmonaut. That is a powerful story, for millions of people, the most powerful story on Earth. But the story had a rot at its center, and it spread. The state that freed Europe crushed Budapest in 1956 and Prague in 1968. The same system ran the Gulag, starved its own countryside in the 1930s, and shot its own generals. By the 1970s, the economy had stopped growing properly. The USSR built the world's most beautiful rockets, and almost nothing worth buying in a shop. Queues for bread. 3 generations in one apartment. The leadership grew old, the ideology hardened into ritual, and the gap between the posters and the queues widened every year. The tragedy is that the USSR died twice. Its soul died first in Prague, in Afghanistan in 1979, and in the cynicism of the elite, party men who had long stopped believing in the party they served. The body took 20 more years to notice. In 1991, the end came, and this is the strangest part. The Soviet army was still the largest on Earth. It did not fire a shot. In December, the leaders of 3 republics met in a hunting lodge in Belarus, signed a piece of paper, and the USSR was gone. 4 days later, Gorbachev resigned. The mightiest military machine in history outlived its own country by exactly 4 days. What followed, Russians call the wild 90s. Prices were freed overnight, life savings turned to dust. The economy fell by half in 5 years, a collapse as deep as the Great Depression. Men's life expectancy dropped below 60. And the state's vast property was divided among a handful of insiders who became billionaires overnight, the oligarchs. They shipped the country's oil and metals abroad, parked the money in London, and sent nothing back. A people who had lived under a superpower woke up in a country where you had to bribe the doctor. Then came Vladimir Putin, a former KGB officer, handed power at the very end of 1999. He promised order, and he delivered it, after his fashion. The oligarchs were tamed. Oil and gas money rebuilt the state. Wages rose, pride returned, and the world learned to take Russia seriously again. But watch the symbols. In 1991, the new Russia chose a new old flag, the white, blue, and red tricolor, the flag of the Russian Empire, the very empire the revolution had overthrown. Not the red flag of the workers. The imperial one. That choice is the whole story. The Soviet Union was an idea that happened to have a country. Today's Russia is a country that has no idea, so it reached back for the oldest one available, nationalism. The cult of the war. The memory of 1945, now the center of national identity. And raw power, a nuclear arsenal still the largest on Earth, the one thing that makes everyone listen. Now measure the difference. In the 1970s, the USSR competed with America for the allegiance of half the planet. People in Havana, Hanoi, and Lusaka genuinely believed in the Soviet project. Who believes in the Russian project today? Nobody. Russian culture is respected, Russian ideas recruit no one. The Soviet Union had missiles and an ideology, a combination that frightened America for 50 years. Russia has missiles and a border. The numbers agree. The USSR had nearly 300 million people and the world's second economy. Russia has 146 million and shrinking. Its economy is roughly a tenth the size of America's. Since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, hundreds of thousands of its most educated citizens have left, and its trade increasingly runs through one partner, China. The largest country on Earth is now defined by what it exports, not by what it believes. So what did Russia lose in 1991? Not the weapons, those stayed. Not the territory, that mostly stayed. Not the seat at the great powers table, that stayed too. It lost the thing that had made the USSR a superpower, a reason for the world to care beyond its borders. America feared Soviet ideas. No one fears Russian ideas, because there are none, only missiles, oil, and pride. That is the whole distance between 1945 and today. The country that defeated Hitler and put the first human in space was an empire of an idea. The country that inherited its arsenal is a nation-state with nuclear weapons, the largest, strongest, most heavily armed nation-state on Earth, and a nation-state nonetheless. The Soviet Union died because it betrayed its own idea. Russia did not betray an idea. It simply does not have one. And that is the story of how the most ideological empire in history became the most nostalgic one, a country that once promised the world a future, left with nothing but a past.